Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We are continuing in this book, The Straight Path, written by the well-known scholar Abdullah al-Harari. May Allah have mercy upon him. We've arrived in the book to page 39. We're at the top of page 39, 39, insha'Allah. And just to remind everyone where we are in the book, we're still talking about blasphemy. Okay, in particular, we just finished a big list of statements and sentences that a person might say that takes them out of Islam. And we mentioned that if a person says something that's blasphemy, then that takes them out of Islam, even if they don't believe what they said, even if they were joking. Okay, but there were 5 exceptions to this rule, 5 cases where if a person says something that's blasphemy, we do not rule that he left Islam. The first case was the case of the slip of the tongue, where he was trying to say something that's not blasphemy, but his words got jumbled up, and what came out of his mouth was something blasphemy, but that's not what he was trying to say. In that case, we don't say he left Islam, because the kufr that he said is not what he meant to say. The second case was the case of loss of consciousness. So if a person has gone insane, or if a person has like fainted and he's unconscious, or even if a person is asleep, if while in that state he says something that's blasphemy, we do not say that he left Islam. Why? Because he doesn't even know what he's saying. The third case is the case of the person who is being compelled to speak blasphemy via a threat of death or something similar to a threat of death, like a credible threat, and there's no way to avoid this threat except by saying the kufr. And in this case, as long as he hates the kufr he said, and in his heart he's still firm on the proper belief, then in this case we rule that he did not leave Islam because he was compelled to say that against his will. The fourth case is the case of quoting someone else's kufr. So if the kufr came out of your mouth, but you use some kind of quotation indicator, you said something to indicate that these words that you're speaking are not your words, but they're someone else's words. So because of your quotation indicator, those words will be attributed to whomever you attributed it to. It will not be attributed to you. And so you do not leave Islam in that case. And for the last couple classes, we've been talking about the 5th exception to the rule. The 5th case where a person might say something that's blasphemy, might say something that's kufr, and we will not rule that he left Islam as a result. That's the case of a person doing ta'wil, or as some scholars call it, ijtihad. This is when a person makes a mistake in understanding the religious texts, like the Quran or the Sunnah. Okay, and because of his misunderstanding, he concludes something that's kufr. Okay, he reaches a conclusion that's kufr. In this case, it does not take him out of Islam on the condition that he's not going against something that's 100% crystal clear in the religion, 100% known for certain to be the correct understanding. If he goes against something like that, then the exception will not apply, and we do rule that he left Islam. Okay, so let's go back into where we were. We're still talking about case number 5, ijtihad. Okay, when are the cases when it's an exception and it actually protects this person from being ruled out of Islam? And what are the cases when it does not protect the person? We're on page 39 in the book. Top of the page, it says, among the documents of the school, talking about the Shafi'i school, among the documents of the school about the case of misunderstanding the religious text while trying to arrive at the truth, and the case of citing blasphemy, like that's quoting someone else's kufr, is the saying of Shamsuddin al-Ramli. Okay, Muhammad al-Ramli, who's known as Shamsuddin, he's one of the well-known scholars of the Shafi'i school. Very widely followed, mashallah, and he wrote an explanation of Imam al-Nawawi's Minhaj al-Talibin. Minhaj al-Talibin is an extremely famous text in the Shafi'i school, studied all over the world. And al-Ramli's explanation of it is also very famous and also very widely studied. What did this man, Shamsuddin al-Ramli, say in his explanation of the book? It says, in his explanation of Minhaj al-Talibin, in the beginning of the book of apostasy, because there's a section of the book that deals with this subject, the subject of apostasy, the subject of a person who was a Muslim leaving Islam. And Imam al-Nawawi, in his book, Minhaj al-Talibin, what did he say? It says, in his explanation of the saying of al-Nawawi, apostasy is cutting off Islam with an intention or saying of blasphemy. So Imam al-Nawawi, in his book, Minhaj al-Talibin, he said apostasy is, he gives a definition. He says apostasy is when a person breaks his Islam, meaning he leaves Islam, says with an intention, meaning something in his heart, like a belief. Okay, so he believed something incorrect, or he doubted where he's not permitted to doubt. It says, or saying of blasphemy, or it's because he said something that's kufr. He mentions these two ways as ways to leave Islam. However, it's also possible to do something that takes you out of Islam, although that one's a lot more rare than the beliefs or the expressions. So he mentions those two. All right. So I'm just being clear here. Imam al-Nawawi, in his book, Minhaj al-Talibin, he said apostasy is the cutting off of Islam with an intention or a saying of blasphemy. That's what al-Nawawi said. Now, Shamsuddin al-Ramli is going to explain what Imam al-Nawawi means here. He's going to add some details to make sure that the student of knowledge understands. What does Shamsuddin al-Ramli say? He says, so there is no effect from the slip of the tongue, compulsion, misunderstanding the religious text while trying to arrive at the truth, and citing blasphemy. So Shamsuddin al-Ramli, he mentions right there 4 of the 5 exceptions. He mentions the slip of the tongue. He mentions the case of compulsion, where you're being compelled by threat of death. He mentions the case of mistaken ijtihad. And he mentions the case of citing or quoting someone else's blasphemy. The only one of the 5 exceptions he left out is the loss of consciousness, because anyone who's advanced enough to be studying that book is certainly advanced enough to know that the person whose mind is gone is not even accountable. So that's why they didn't bother to mention it there. Whereas all these people that are mentioned, they're accountable people. Okay, so why is it that we don't rule that they left Islam? Because there's no effect if it's a slip of the tongue, or if he's compelled, or if it was mistaken ijtihad, or if it was quoting someone else's blasphemy. It says, and the saying of the commentator. Oh boy. Okay, now you start. For those of you who don't know, you're starting to get a glimpse into how Shafi'i fiqh works. You know, books stack on top of books. Imam Nawawi wrote Minhaj al-Talibin, which actually itself is a summary and like an editing of an earlier book. But Imam Nawawi wrote Minhaj al-Talibin, and then Shamsuddin al-Rumli wrote an explanation of Minhaj al-Talibin. And then you have these people called commentators, al-Muhashi. You have these commentators come along and write a commentary on the explanation. So it's like Minhaj al-Talibin, which is a pretty small book, single volume, not that big. And Shamsuddin al-Rumli's explanation, the copy I have, is 6 volumes. It's much bigger than the original book. Then you get a commentator who then adds even more to it, making it much larger. You know, adding more detail, clarifying things that maybe weren't as clear as they could be in the explanation. So what does the commentator say? It says, and the saying of the commentator, that is, the author of the commentary of the explanation, Nuruddin Ali al-Shabramelisi, who died in the year 1087 after the Hijrah, concerning Ar-Rumli's statement and misunderstanding. All right, so again, just to make sure we all are clear, An-Nawawi said in Minhaj al-Talibin that apostasy is the cutting off of Islam by an intention or a statement, like a saying of blasphemy. Then Shamsuddin al-Rumli explains when it comes to these sayings that there are exceptions. He says there's no effect for a slip of the tongue or compulsion or the mistaken ijtihad or um, or the quoting someone's blasphemy. So now a Shebra Melisi comes along and he wants to give more information about when Shamsuddin al-Rumli said uh, mistaken ijtihad. Because Shamsuddin al-Rumli left out some details that are important. So what did he say? Ashabra Melisi said, right at the part where al-Rumli said mistaken ijtihad, he said, that is not absolutely. Okay, when he says not absolutely, he means not without restriction. Okay, because what Shamsuddin al-Rumli said might give the impression that if a person makes a mistaken ijtihad, then that prevents him from being ruled out of Islam. And what Ashabra Melisi is saying here is not absolutely. He's saying not without restriction. He's saying there are cases where if a person makes mistaken ijtihad, he's still going to be ruled out of Islam because this exception does not always apply. And then he gives an example. He says, as is clear from what will be presented about the likes of the blasphemy of those who say that the world is eternal, despite that it is based on deduction and inference. So Shabra Melisi, he said, uh, that even if a person makes ijtihad and he errs in his ijtihad, this does not necessarily mean that he's safe from being ruled out of Islam. Okay, and his proof is that there have been people in the Islamic history who were ruled out of Islam even though they did a mistaken ijtihad. And the example he gives are the ones who said that the universe is eternal, the ones who said that this world is not created, that it's always existed, that Allah did not create it. These people are ruled out of Islam. These people are ruled what? Out of Islam, even though they arrived at that conclusion by doing ijtihad with great, mental powers, with research, deduction, and inference. What are some other examples of mistaken ijtihad, which is not excused, mistaken ijtihad, where the person who says it is still ruled out of Islam, like those who say that hell will come to an end, or like those who say that the believer and the kafir get the same reward on the day of judgment. Okay, people who say these kinds of things, we rule them out of Islam. Okay, because they're going against what's very clear in the deen. Okay, the deen is very clear that the believers go to paradise and the kafirs go to hell, and that these rewards are not the same. The deen is very clear that hellfire lasts forever and paradise lasts forever. So if someone claims that one or both of them will come to an end, he's not excused in that. This deen is very clear that everything other than Allah was created by Allah. So if someone claims that there are things in the world that are uncreated, then this person is clearly going against what is very clear in our deen. MashaAllah. Page 40. It says, the other commentator on the explanation of Ar-Rumli. Okay, so here you have a Nawawi who wrote it, Minhaj al-Talibin, and Shamsuddin al-Rumli who explained it. And we said one of the people who wrote a commentary on that explanation was Nuruddin Ali Ash-Shabramelisi. So now we're going to talk about a different scholar who was alive at the same time as Ash-Shabramelisi, who also wrote a commentary on Shamsuddin al-Rumli's explanation. It says the other commentator on the explanation of al-Rumli, Ahmed ibn Abd al-Razzaq, who is famous as al-Maghribi al-Rashidi. This one died in the year 1096 after the Hijrah. The last one died in the year 1087 after the Hijrah. So they died just 9 years apart. Okay, so they were, contemporaries of one another, and each one of them chose to write a commentary on al-Rumli's explanation. What did al-Maghribi al-Rashidi say? He said, his saying, misunderstanding, that is, in reference to what does not have definitive evidence against his misunderstanding, as proven by the blasphemy of the likes of those who say the world is eternal, even though it was by ijtihad. It says by inference. Okay, so what al-Maghribi al-Rashidi is saying here is basically the same thing as what the Shabramelisi said, but even more clearly. He says a mistaken ijtihad will save a person from being ruled out of Islam as long as it does not have definitive evidence going against this misunderstanding. Because if the evidence going against this misunderstanding is definitive, qati', like clear and has no chance of being incorrect, if you have evidence like that, that's clear and 100% certain to be understood properly, and it's going against your misunderstanding, then your misunderstanding does not save you. We will still rule a person out of Islam if they do a mistaken ijtihad that goes against what is firmly established and known with 100% certainty to be correct. Continuing in the book, it says, from here, it is known that not every person who has a misunderstanding is saved from blasphemy by his misunderstanding. Okay, not everybody. It's not the case that everybody who makes a mistaken ijtihad is saved from being ruled out of Islam. No. The ones who went against the clear evidence are still ruled out of Islam. But the ones who made a mistake in ijtihad in a matter that's not clear, these ones are the ones who are saved from being ruled out of Islam. It says, so let the student of knowledge, that's us, always remember the aforementioned saying of al-Rashidi when he said, in reference to what does not have definitive evidence. This means one should always recall this statement in his heart because it is important. So, what the author, may Allah have mercy on him, is saying to us here is that all of us like me, you, the ones listening to this video right now, we need to like burn this sentence into our brains and never ever forget it. We need to keep it at the front of our minds all the time, which is that if you make a mistake and misunderstand something in this deen, okay, then you are going to be out of Islam if it goes against the definitive evidence. If it goes against something qati', like the consensus. If you go against the Islamic consensus, then your misunderstanding is not going to save you from being ruled out of Islam. It says misunderstanding in the face of definitive evidence does not prevent the charge of blasphemy against the one who misunderstood. And think about it. You know, if it were the case that any kind of mistaken ijtihad, whether it went against clear evidence or not, if it were the case that any kind of mistaken ijtihad will save you from being ruled out of Islam, then all kinds of crazy errors uh, would actually block a person from being ruled out of Islam. Okay, it would mean that crazy beliefs would be legitimate. For example, the belief that the world is eternal. If every kind of ijtihad protects you from being ruled out of Islam, then we would be saying it's legitimate to believe Allah did not create the world. Okay? Or like believing that hellfire ends. Okay? Or even Christians. The Christians arrived at their belief via ijtihad. Didn't they gather as much evidence as they could and infer their beliefs? They reached these conclusions after struggling with the evidence. That's called ijtihad. And they clearly made a mistake in their ijtihad because their belief is not right. Okay? So the question is, does the fact that they made ijtihad save them from us saying that they're not Muslims? No, it doesn't. Because they ended up believing things that go against the clear evidence of Islam. They ended up believing Allah has a son. They ended up believing that a human being is worthy of worship. Okay? So they are not saved by the fact that they made ijtihad. They are not saved by the fact that their ijtihad was incorrect. No. Why? Because if your ijtihad goes against the definitive evidence, then it doesn't save you. You still get ruled out of Islam. And the same goes for Buddhists and many people that follow other religions. All right. Their conclusions go against the clear consensus of the Islamic Ummah. And so we rule them out of Islam, even if their conclusions were reached by ijtihad. And just for your information, uh, among those who said that the world is eternal is Ibn Taymiyyah, the one the Wahhabis call Shaykh of Islam. He is among the ones who said that the world is eternal. Among the others who said that is Ibn Sina, the famous Arab doctor. He said that. And Al-Farabi, the famous Arab philosopher. These are among the ones who said that the world is not created. This is why we don't refer to these people as Islamic philosophers. Okay, there are people in the West, they refer to these people like Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi as Islamic philosophers. Okay, you should not use this term because these people are actually out of Islam because of their belief. So if you call them Islamic philosophers, what are you doing? You are messaging to people that they're still Muslims despite this belief that Allah did not create the world. And that's not the case. We don't call them Islamic philosophers, we just call them philosophers. Okay? Even though the Westerners they like to apply the word Islamic to mean or to indicate that these philosophers came from the Islamic civilization, not from Western civilization. Uh, which is a true statement, but their actual beliefs were not Islamic. Okay, they were not in the religion of Islam, so we don't call them Islamic philosophers. MashaAllah. Page 41. It says, what we said about the Khawarij. Okay, so now we're going back to something that was mentioned a few pages ago. We mentioned that there's a group called the Khawarij. They rebelled against Ali radiallahu anhu. And we said that they were not declared kafirs because their rebellion against Ali was based on a ta'wil. It was based on a mistaken ijtihad. And their mistaken ijtihad saved them from being ruled out of Islam. So we said they're not kafirs. But then we said, well, actually, some of them really were kafirs for other reasons, not because of their rebellion, but because of their corrupt belief that enormous sins take you out of Islam. Some of them even went so far as to say that small sins take you out of Islam. And for those sayings, we declared them to be kafirs for real. It says, what we said about the Khawarij, excluding some of them from being among those who were charged with blasphemy, is because of the confirmation of what dictates charging some of them with blasphemy, as supported by the saying of some companions who narrated the hadiths about the Khawarij. So there are a number of hadith about the Khawarij, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying they go through the deen like an arrow through a target and they don't come back to it. Hadith like that are hadith that show that these people, the Khawarij, actually were kafirs, that they actually left the deen and died in a state other than a state of Islam. Okay, this is why some of the scholars said the Khawarij are kafirs, because you have hadith supporting that. Okay, but then you have other scholars who said, hold up, hold up, hold up. In reality, these hadith only apply to some of them, not to all of them. Some of them, we did not rule them out of Islam because they had a mistaken ijtihad in something that was not crystal clear. Whereas the ones who did leave Islam are the ones who started saying that enormous sins take you out of Islam. It says, as for what was narrated from our master Ali, radiallahu anhu wa karrama wajhah, that he said, our brothers have transgressed against us. There is no evidence in it to judge all of them with Islam. Okay, some people tried to say that the Khawarij are Muslims, like all of them. The true statement is what I said a minute ago, that some of them are out of Islam, but some of them fell under the exception and therefore were not ruled out of Islam. This is the true statement. But some people tried to say that all of them are still in Islam. And what evidence do they point to? They said, Ali said about the Khawarij, our brothers have transgressed against us. Ali said, our brothers have rebelled against us. He called them brothers. And so they say this is proof that Ali did not consider them out of Islam. Okay, and Ali, as you know, was the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba. So that to them, that's like a proof that they weren't out of Islam. What does the author say about that? The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said there is no evidence in it to judge all of them with Islam because its chain of narration was not confirmed from Ali. So the first reason why this doesn't count as evidence is because it's a weak hadith. Okay, we haven't confirmed that Ali actually said that at all. Okay, so number one, we don't know that Ali said it. And number two, it says, and the Hafiz and Mujtahid Ibn Jarir al-Tabari and others were certain about charging them with blasphemy. And he mentioned that some of the other scholars who are top level Mujtahid scholars, like Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, who has his own madhab, okay, he's a top level scholar who had his own madhab, a Mujtahid Mutlaq. He said very clearly, the Khawarij are kafirs. So what we have here are clear statements from qualified scholars, and Al-Tabari is not the only one, who said those Khawarij are kafirs. And you have Sahih Hadith narrated from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, such as the one where the Prophet alaihi salatu wasallam said, "If I live to see them, then I'm going to kill them the way Ad was killed." Okay, hadith like this, you don't say those kind of things except about kafirs. So there's plenty of evidence that they are kafirs. And the only thing they can point to try to say that they're not kafirs is something weak that's not even confirmed that Ali said. Okay, so we stick to the strong opinion, which is that some of the Khawarij were kafirs and some of them were not. It says this is taken to be in reference to the different cases of the Khawarij. Some of them reached the level of blasphemy and others did not. Then it says this case has been expressed by some as ijtihad and some have expressed it as ta'wil. So here the author is clarifying some terminologies. Okay, some of the scholars, like Al-Maghribi, Al-Rashidi, and Al-Shabra Melisi, and Shamsuddin al-Ramli, use the word ijtihad. They said one of the exceptions that'll save you from being ruled out of Islam is ijtihad. Of course, with the condition that it not go against the clear, definitive evidence. But some other scholars, like Sirajuddin al-Bulqini, used the word ta'wil, and we read what he said a few pages ago as well, where he said that it should say without a ta'wil in order to exclude, in order to provide an exception for like the rebels who rebelled and for those who refused to pay zakat. Okay, so he's saying that even though some scholars use the word ta'wil and some scholars use the word ijtihad, they're actually talking about the same thing, which is that a person is interpreting a religious text, but he arrived at a wrong interpretation. It says this case has been expressed by some as ijtihad, and some have expressed it as ta'wil. Among those who use the term ta'wil is the Hafiz, Faqih, and Shafi'i, Sirajuddin al-Bulqini, the one whom the author of Al-Qamus referred to as the savant of the world, or like, the huge scholar of the world. This man, Sirajuddin al-Bulqini, is a mujtahid within the Shafi'i school. He's an extremely high-level scholar who at his time was very famous. The book, Al-Qamus, is a dictionary written by a man named Al-Fayruz Abadi. Al-Fayruz Abadi. In this book, Al-Qamus Al-Muhit, is so famous that for those of you who learn Arabic, they mostly use the word qamus simply to mean dictionary. Even though the word qamus doesn't mean dictionary, it's just the name of that one particular dictionary. It's so famous that the word qamus has become almost like a general term for dictionaries in general. And the author of the book, he wrote in his dictionary that Sirajuddin al-Bulqini is Alamatul Dunya, like the top scholar in the world, mashallah. And he used what term? Ta'wil. It says, some of the explainers of Minhaj al-Talibin have expressed it as ijtihad, and both expressions must be properly restricted. So whether you use the word ta'wil or use the word ijtihad, you always have to add a very important restriction, which is what? That it will only save you from being ruled out of Islam if it does not have clear, definitive evidence going against it, such as the consensus of the Ummah. Continuing in the book, from here, it is known that not everyone who misunderstands is protected from blasphemy by their misunderstanding. So let no thinker think that is absolute, because generalizing in that is a disbanding of and exiting from the religion. Okay, and that's for the reason I said before. If a person thinks that any kind of ijtihad will save you from being ruled out of Islam, then what you've actually done is you have legitimated Christianity and Buddhism and other religions and things like that. So it's like a disbanding of this being. Okay, this is why we can't just say this like it's general. Okay, like it applies all the time that every ijtihad will save you from being ruled out of Islam. Okay, that's not the case. It needs to be restricted by saying it will only save you as long as there's no crystal clear, 100% certain, definitive evidence going against it. It says, "Do you not see that many of those who attributed themselves to Islam while busying themselves with philosophy went out of the religion for their belief that the world is eternal out of their ijtihad?" He's saying, can't you see that the people who ended up, because of their mistaken ijtihad, believing that the world is not created, they still left Islam. They're still ruled to be out of Islam. So it means the fact that they did ijtihad did not save them. So this is one of the signs, okay, one of the like historical examples that just because you make ijtihad, it won't necessarily save you. Because in this case, there's definitive evidence against it. It says, despite that, the Muslims have agreed. What does it mean when it says the Muslims have agreed? It means this is consensus, unanimous opinion of all the mujtahid scholars, consensus. And our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the Ummah will never reach unanimous agreement and be misguided. So that means that the mujtahid scholars, which are the only people in the Ummah whose opinions matter, if they all are in 100% agreement about something, this is called ijma, or consensus, and they're guaranteed to be correct. This is why we can never go against the consensus, because once consensus is established, then that opinion that there's consensus on is the very definitive evidence that this whole issue we're talking about depends on. So if you have a misunderstanding that goes against the definitive evidence, then we're still going to rule you out of Islam. But if you have a misunderstanding that does not have any definitive evidence going against it, well, then we say your misunderstanding, your mistaken ijtihad, saved you from being ruled out of Islam. It says, despite that, the Muslims have agreed on charging them with blasphemy, as mentioned by the Muhaddith and Faqih Badruddin az-Zarkashi in his explanation of Jam'ul Jawami'. So Jam'ul Jawami' is a famous text in Usul al-Fiqh, and Imam az-Zarkashi, who was a Muhaddith and a Faqih, wrote an explanation of that book called Tashnif al-Masami'. It says, he said, after mentioning the two groups of philosophers, the group who claim that the world is eternal, it says here, by its substance and its form, and the group who claim that the world is eternal by its type, that is, its kind only. He says the Muslims have agreed on deeming them misguided and charging them with blasphemy. All right, let's talk about what this means. So there are actually two types of philosophers who claim that the world is eternal. Okay. One type, which is like Aristotle and them, one type claimed that the world is eternal, meaning uncreated, meaning it has no beginning to its existence. They claim that the world is eternal in its type and in its individuals. What does that mean? The easy way to understand this is to think of it like a set. Like you have a set that contains individual things. So, like the set of all humans is a set that includes me, and I'm one individual human. It includes you, and you are one individual human. It includes that other person, and that's one individual human, etc. So it includes the individual humans within the set. That set, which you can just call humanity, is a type, and the individuals that fall under that type are the individuals. So, what one group of philosophers said is that the type of the world or the kind of the world is eternal, and the individuals of the world are also eternal. So, they would have said that you have always existed, and I have always existed, and this chair behind me has always existed. Okay, that's what they would say. They would say the individual things in the world are eternal, and the types that they fall under are also eternal. But then there's another group of philosophers. This group includes Ibn Taymiyyah. There's another group of philosophers. They said that the individual things in the world are created, they're not eternal. But the type, the kinds, are eternal. Okay, this is so Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, he said that the arsh, the throne, he said the throne is created, but before it was created, there was another throne. And that one was also created. And before that one was created, there was another throne. And that one was also created. And before that one, there was another one, which is also created. And before that, another one, and another one. It's called an infinite regress. These people, Ibn Taymiyyah, he claimed that uh, all of the thrones are created things because he said all the individuals are created. He said, but the type is uncreated. So he's saying thronehood has always existed. He said thronehood is eternal, that it existed in eternity with Allah. He's saying that thronehood is a partner of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the attribute of beginninglessness. Okay, this is why this statement is kufr and blasphemy. This is why the statement is kufr and blasphemy, because he said Allah has a partner in that attribute. And so in this book, Tashnif al-Masami', which is the explanation of Jam' al-Jawami', the Imam Badruddin az-Zarkashi, he said, those of you who are following along in the Arabic side, this quote is not exactly word for word. It says in the Arabic, ma nassuhu, which means what follows is supposed to be a direct word for word quote. And instead it says, ittafaqa al-muslimuna ala tadlilihim wa takfirihim. That's not the word for word quote. The actual quote that Imam az-Zarkashi said is, وَقَدْ ضَلَّلَهُمُ الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَكَفَّرُوهُم. He said, وَقَدْ ضَلَّلَهُمْ الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَكَفَّرُوا فِي ذَلِكَ وَقَدْ ضَلَّلَهُمُ الْمُسْلِمُونَ فِي ذَلِكَ وَكَفَّرُوهُم. Okay, so the actual quote, it means the Muslims. So again, he's indicating consensus, unanimous opinion. He said the Muslims ruled them astray for that and ruled them out of Islam. So he's saying that by consensus, both of these groups of philosophers, whether they believe the world was eternal in its kind and individuals, or whether they believe the world was eternal in kind only, both of these types of philosophers, by the unanimous opinion of the Muslims, are not Muslim. It says likewise, likewise blasphemed the Murji'ah. Okay, the Murji'ah is a different astray group. It says those who said that sins are not harmful while having belief, just as good deeds are not beneficial while having blasphemy. All right, these people said that if a person is a believer, then his sins don't harm him. Okay, there's no harm in doing sins. Do as many as you like, is what they said. Just like how a person who's a kafir, his good deeds don't benefit him. And that's true. Like kafirs, their good deeds don't benefit them. On the day of judgment, their pan of good deeds is going to be empty. Okay? That part is true. But then what did they do? They tried to make a kind of qiyas off of that and say, well, if good deeds don't benefit a kafir, then that means bad deeds don't harm a believer. Okay, and this is, of course, kufr. This is blasphemy. The Quran as well as the Hadith definitely warn us against sin, definitely warn us that these sins carry a threat of punishment with it. Okay, so if you claim that there's no harm to the believer in committing a sin, this is kufr, blasphemy, that takes one out of Islam. It says, they only said that out of ijtihad and ta'wil of some texts outside of their context. What it means by context here is like, it doesn't mean context the way we normally use it. It means like their proper understanding. Okay, he's saying these people, they made ijtihad and ta'wil of some of the religious texts, like the Quran and the Hadith, but they understood these texts outside of the proper understanding of these texts. What it means is they misunderstood it. Okay, and they were not excused. The Murji'ah were not excused for their misunderstanding. Okay, the Islamic scholars did not say that, oh, well, since this was a mistaken ijtihad, it prevented you from being ruled out of Islam. No. They said in this case, you're still ruled out of Islam because your misunderstanding goes against what is supported with clear, definitive evidence. It says, likewise, groups other than they, it says other than them, but really it should say other than they. Likewise, groups other than they went astray. It says, while they are attributed to Islam. And I think a better way to translate this sentence would be, likewise, groups other than they went astray, and they attributed themselves to Islam. What we're saying is there were a lot of people who considered themselves to be Muslims, okay? But they went astray and ended up leaving Islam. And why did they go astray? By mistaken ijtihad. And their mistaken ijtihad did not save them. Okay, so all of these examples that we're talking about, we spent a lot of time talking about this subject. It was all building towards one purpose, which is to kind of like drill into your head this sentence that was said by Al-Maghribi al-Rashidi, which is that a mistaken ijtihad will only save you as long as there's no definitive evidence going against this mistaken understanding. I'll read it again. It says, likewise, groups other than they went astray and they attributed themselves to Islam. Their deviance was through ijtihad and ta'wil. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for steadfastness upon the truth. Ameen. Let's stop here and we'll begin at this rule at the bottom of page 43, insha'Allah ta'ala. So with that, we've reached the end of the 5 exceptions to kufr of the tongue. All right, next we're going to start talking about some more particulars about when do you rule a particular statement as being blasphemy or not being blasphemy. Because very often the words that are in a sentence can mean this or they can mean something else. And so it's not always clear what the meaning of a sentence is. We're going to talk a little bit about how to judge those cases. Barakallahu feekum. If there are questions, please ask now. Of course, as always, if you're able to, please support the masjid. This work of spreading the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and resisting the people of misguidance, namely the Wahhabis and the modernists. This work, it does require money, mashallah. So if you can help, please do. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, then let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. بارك الله فيكم. Uh, I'm not sure the donation info, brother. If you were on YouTube, I think there's some kind of button you can push to donate. But if you look up at the top of the comments, it has some Cash App and some Zelle addresses, some PayPal addresses where you can donate, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah bless you and reward you, brother. If there are no other questions, then I'll see you next time at the same week. I'm sorry, next week at the same time, inshallah ta'ala. See that right there? That's called a slip of the tongue. Now, if what had come out of my mouth had been kufr, then I would not be ruled out of Islam if, a slip of the tongue was the cause of the kufr, mashallah. All right. I'll see you next week, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.